Okay, so welcome. This is going to be our hopefully very high level overview of how deployments and releases are working. So this is December 2022. So this is kind of current as of now. So within delivery, we are looking after deploying to GitLab.com and also releasing to our self-managed users. And they are connected, but running on quite different cadences. So deployments to .com, we are tracking that with MTTP, sort of in real terms of how frequently changes are landing on .com. We're usually getting around 4 or 5 deployments a day. So that one is running on the sort of hours schedule. And then everything that has landed on .com gets packaged up for the monthly self-managed release. So same changes, different package, different release cadence. And then between those two, we also have the scheduled security release and we also have patch releases. So what this looks like, I've just started working. It's a little bit rough and ready, but coming soon is I've added a I'm really not getting on well with with Zoom today. I don't know why it looks different to me. I've just started working on improving things in the handbook. So we previously had everything on the releases handbook page. I've added a new page, which is deployments and releases, to give this level of kind of overview of what roughly are we doing. If you don't need to be the person that actually presses the button, like how do deployments and releases work? And then from there, we can drill down into like the specifics of the processes. So
that's excellent.
Deployments and releases, what is roughly happening here is there's sort of three phases, right? So we have the mostly stage groups responsible for this bit where releases, code is written, changes, features, bug fixes, whatever it is, and they're being reviewed, and then eventually they get merged into whatever the project's default branch is. And then we sort of pull those up, and then on a scheduled cadence. So this was determined by the release managers at the moment. Like it's maybe every 3 hours. A package gets created. So basically everything that hasn't previously been deployed gets wrapped up into a new package. The packaging pipelines are owned by distribution. So distribution provide us with a package, and that then triggers our deployment process.
Okay, first questions.
Yes, go for it.
So my understanding of this is that essentially every time a deployment is run, a new package is created, and the diff is a list of commits to the default branch, essentially.
Yes.
So commits that landed within a certain window, and you can definitely say, okay, between this, package and the new package, these 20 new commits are in. You don't know what those are, right? I mean, you do, but it could be anything that is committed in that period of time.
That's right, exactly. Yeah. So we do know like specifically what they are, but from a kind of like a deployment process, it is treated a bit like a black box. We are not expecting to evaluate this particular commit was more risky than that one, and therefore the process changes. It's like automated as close as we can get to continuous deployment. So we trigger off. So on step 4, we basically have a package that automatically triggers off our deployment process, which I'll show you a little bit more in a second. But like largely, it's basically if we are able to do the deployment, it begins on deploying. And then we have a kind of that then feeds to, we attempt to deploy this to GitLab.com.
Okay.
So that is a regular cadence going on. New packages with any new changes get created. They hopefully get deployed to .com. Cycle repeats.
Cool.
And then sort of at a set point in the month, we trigger the release process. So that will happen this month. We'll be kicking that off at the end of this week. Most of the prep work will take place next week ahead of the 22nd, basically trying to pull together. We basically sort of repeat this process in a sense, right? Which is everything that didn't previously get packaged for self-managed users gets created into a package, we test that, and then hopefully we go ahead and publish that package.
I have a question. So let's say you have created a deployment that is running on GitLab.com today.
Yeah.
And then is there any difference between that package that was deployed to GitLab.com and a self-managed package? Or is it literally at some point you say, okay, you know, we've deployed to GitLab.com a package 3 hours ago, that's going to be the release candidate. And so anything that follows after that is, you know, yes, it's already on GitLab.com, but the cutoff was here, this is the package. Or is that different?
It is a different package, and that is down to the time period. So a new package that's heading to .com this morning, for example, will only have about 4 hours of changes in it because it will be from the previous package. A package going to self-managed will have a month's worth of changes because it will be going from the previous self-managed package, which was the 22nd of the previous month. So the size of the package is different. I think, I don't know this for certain though, actually, but I think it must be a different pipeline because I think the packages we are creating for .com, I think are intended for .com. I don't know that we create, actually, no, that might not be true because we build them on dev. We may create all the versions because that's the other big one for the self-managed is creating them in every installation version, but actually, yes, they may be the same. But the main difference is the time frame. Okay,
but I'm not sure I quite understand. So this is just me being maybe a bit daft. Let's say you start on Monday, right? And
yep.
you just for the sake of the argument, right? And you build new packages for GitLab.com every few hours, and then on Friday, you know, this is not like all of the changes that happen through the week are incorporated in Friday's package plus the latest diff, you know, from a few hours ago. So the package on Friday is everything that changed in the entire week, correct? You always add new changes to the package, right? It's like, it's not incremental, right? It's like you always add something on top.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, you're totally right. Let me think about how they end up being different in that case.
So I think what would make sense to me is if the GitLab.com pipeline for package creation is kind of different, right? Where you make these packages every few hours and then the differences are small. Whereas for the self-managed release, you run this pipeline, let's say only once a month, you know, and then, you know, you have to incorporate all of those changes all at once.
Yeah, that's right. I think probably what the big difference will be, I don't actually, yeah, it's a great question because actually I don't know the exact differences. I think it's probably around tagging. So it's probably about what we're actually saying is what is with like the version, right? So on on .com, it's you know, the previous version was a few hours ago, and we have a new version. Self-managed, we obviously tagging a much larger change set. So I think that's probably the big difference. But actually, yeah, I don't know the exact differences there.
Yeah, because you could like just conceptually, and again, I don't know, if you, let's say you created a release candidate and tagged it as such, you should be able to deploy it to GitLab.com, right, at that point, because it just then happens to be the tagged release that is running on GitLab.com, because you know, it's all of the commits up to this specific point.
Yes,
but then if
correct,
you like do more incremental deployments on GitLab.com, it won't be that tag. It's maybe the like last SHA of the commit or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, yeah. And at the moment, just .com is ahead of self-managed, so the ordering is affecting that. But yeah, I think that's correct.
Okay, yeah, because I think this is something where one thing that I, as of today, have to figure out is, you know, we will deploy changes for self-managed ahead of self-managed on GitLab.com, right? But I could never figure out when is the exact point where GitLab.com runs the version that is going to be shipped
I see. Okay,
to our
yeah.
customers, right? Where you
Right,
can say like, yes, we've given that like a day of exposure and it was fine, right? And
right.
so I think
Yeah, let
this,
me go through that. Yeah, because that's definitely you will probably be slightly aware, although not super aware if it's more aimed at the engineers, but you will probably be slightly aware of the things that indicate that, but I can certainly go through that for sure. So
cool.
Well, no, let me go through that actually. So what happens is we start the prep for the monthly release. So in this month, we will begin that on the 16th. So the challenge we have is we need to be able to package a stable set of changes, right? So on .com, we can recover reasonably straightforwardly. So it's a lot less risky. We just, new changes come in and we deploy them to .com. And if needed, it could roll back, or more commonly, we tend to roll forwards and we fix from there. The challenge for the self-managed is we take a point in time and we cut and we say, all of these changes are a stable release candidate. So what we do to firstly guarantee this 22nd, but also secondly to try and guarantee the stability is we have sort of steps where we almost sort of we almost guarantee changes will make it. So the first one of those will happen on this Friday at the end of the day. The release managers will announce the candidate commit to make self-managed. And what that basically is, it's sort of our insurance policy. So we're basically able to say everything up until this point will definitely go into the 22nd, but hopefully more, because that's quite a few days. In this case, it'll be the 16th. So quite a few days ahead of the 22nd. But if things really don't go well, we know we have a point where we can say, this has been running on .com, it is stable, and we will cut from there. So that will be happening on the Friday. That will be a commit that will match up with a deployment that the release managers have made to .com that they're happy with.
I see.
So
okay, so that's the point where there would be a deployment that has run on GitLab.com that then matches the release candidate commit, exactly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that's where we pick the set of changes. And then what will happen from the from the 16th onwards is on the Monday, so the 19th, the release managers they'll still be going through deployments, and we will still be hopefully achieving successful, stable deployments. And if we do, the guaranteed commit starts to move. So we might get to the end of Monday and we have had 3 more deployments and everything looks good. .com is stable. We haven't seen any incidents. We haven't got any failing tests. Great. All of those extra changes then can also be considered part of the monthly release. And I believe that this month, the actual cutoff will be, I believe it is probably the 19th. So we have a date where we basically say, right, this is the commit that we're going to tag from. The reason we do that a few days before the 22nd, because once we do the tag, we're basically at step 6. We then deploy that to, first of all, we check we can generate a passing release candidate. We have tests and things that run for that. And then we deploy it to the pre-environment. We check we can deploy it. We check pre, remains online. We don't have any downtime on the deployment. We run tests there. If there are any problems there, additional changes will be brought into the self-managed release. But in an ideal month, that all just goes completely smoothly. Great, we can tag from there, and that is the self-managed release for the 22nd.
Okay.
So the big unknown, we have 2 really big unknowns that go on around preparing the monthly release. The first one is .com stability. So could be something internal, like a change we deploy isn't as stable as we need it to be, or it could be external. And actually, for unknown reasons, something happens that prevents us deploying for a period of time. So that's where the sort of early steps of prep begin to come in. And then the other second unknown is, at the point we do the release candidate commit, and we basically say this is the change set, there is a chance that isn't a stable change set, and in which case we have to make additional changes. So sometimes it's a case of we have too many changes. We sometimes have people coming and saying we've accidentally picked up something that's, you know, part of a set of changes and we didn't pick the entire set. Or it could be the tests are failing and we need to bring in additional changes. So we start to kind of manage the change set that way.
Okay, but I think this is usually where, like from my perspective, having managed many product teams, they don't really fully understand what's going on, but you do need, so if you, like what happens sometimes, at least from a product perspective, is you really want to ship this feature, then more than one change needs to actually like get merged, right? One of them makes it, but not all of them make it. Or the feature flag doesn't make it. And then, you know, so there's this like, will it go, will it not go? Nobody knows. Or something is wrong, you know, at which point people get pinged. It's like, hey, this thing has, you know, like it's not behaving as it should. What will we do? Right? And then there's manual involvement from the delivery side, which is probably where your time goes, right? When things are not smooth.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. So I think it's definitely a difficult one because there's certainly a lot of unknowns in that prep window. And I think the challenges come from, you know, above all else, we guarantee the 22nd. So there are definite times where I think people, you know, there are changes that like ideally would make it in, but from a time perspective, just simply can't. So that's always the balancing challenge for this one.
Cool.
Yeah,
quick other question. So just looking at your plot, and I'm a fairly sort of visual person, so I appreciate it. Then the numbering is not strictly correct, right? It's like, I mean, it is sort of, there's a loop in here, right? There are deployments, right, on GitLab.com, and then at some point you branch off, right, into the release candidate. But it's not as every deployment on GitLab.com will then be packaged into the release candidate.
Correct.
Right? So,
so the numbers actually match up with this text release, which but they maybe should be letters, but it's not so easy to get.
No, that's okay. I just want to make sure.
But you're right. Yeah, no, this bit is actually. I was actually literally thinking about this the other day, and I didn't come up with a good visual to show. But yeah, you're right. So this deployment bit is a constant, and it's like a cycle, right? Which is basically, do we have new changes for .com? Are we able to deploy them? If so, great, let's deploy. And then there's kind of a secondary process on the release, which again is actually also circular, but it's on a monthly cadence. And they basically just feed, deployments feed into releases. But yeah, sure, right, it's not a linear view. Okay,
no, that's fine. No criticism intended. I just want to make sure that I get it. But, okay.
Yeah. But I think the key thing here is we do sort of almost have three independent processes, right? Where it's like the developer or like the stage group life cycle is its own cycle of create changes and merge changes. And that is actually separated from the deployment cycle, where the deployment cycle is other changes, can I deploy them? And then again, releases are same, but there will always be changes because it's a month. So again, it's like other changes, yes. Can I package and release those? So we kind of have these three independent processes.
Okay, I get that. And just in terms of like terminology, and this is just me trying to get my head around, like you say there's the deployment cycle and the release cycle, but in a way it feels like the release cycle is just a special deployment cycle where the target is different. But the outcome is a package, right? That in one case gets deployed to GitLab.com, and there's probably a ton of complexity in that. Whereas for self-managed, the outcome is a published package that then gets, you know, deployed onto self-managed instances via something else. So there's this whole like sort of package creation bit, which is actually also a little bit different. But then there's this entire sort of deployment part, which is from GitLab.com probably vastly different from, I mean, it is, you know, for how this is actually being done for any kind of self-managed instance,
that's
right?
correct. Yeah. I wonder if the other big difference we have is almost around sort of like maybe not requirements, but like I guess maybe constraints, because one of the things around .com is we can recover more easily, we can detect problems more easily and recover more easily. We have great more use of things like feature flags, so we have like more deployment strategies. The challenge I think with self-managed is it sort of needs to be a ready to go package. Like there are certain assumptions around that, around how like backwards compatible changes, you have the kind of multiple milestones to like roll certain changes out or remove things, and also just the challenge of recovering. So I think those are the bits that actually make it, I think, are a little bit tricky, because they're almost like a totally different group of considerations that
so there's essentially, but it's not meant to be nitpicky, but to me it's just like there are just different ways to deploy GitLab. One is deploying GitLab on .com, which has its own set of constraints and intricacies. Then there is one of deploying to self-managed with different intricacies. And then there is another one coming up, which is deploying to GitLab dedicated, which should be very similar to self-managed.
Exactly,
but
right.
May have some intricacies as well. So there's sort of different targets, and everything varies a little bit by that. But the delivery, and I think this is maybe another question, so like sort of ownership for delivery, you own the entire like deployments to GitLab.com, right? That is something that you are intricately aware of, but you're not actually the owners of the self-managed installation upgrades, right? That goes somewhere else. But in both cases, you own the sort of package, like you don't even own the package pipeline.
We don't own the package. I think I remember we had a good chat with distribution about this. So I think it's like I can't remember how we worded it, but it was something along the lines of like distribution give us the capability to deploy and release, and delivery are basically the ones who take that and turn it into a reality.
Yes.
But yes, I think that's
okay. No, I'm just trying to sort of understand the mental model, because that in my mind, you're kind of a customer of the distribution package pipeline.
Exactly, that's right. We are.
So you will talk to distribution, say, for reasons, we have decided we need to build I don't know, like an arcane package format for GitLab.com, because we're changing our Linux distribution that we run, right? So we need your package thing to not only spit out a Debian package, but an XZ package thing. Can you do that? And then they would say like, well, that's crazy, but they would know how to actually make that reality, not delivery.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. And actually, honestly, it would be probably more likely reliability would ask distribution, or be the ones saying like, the place where this package needs to run has changed, and here are our package requirements. Distribution would create the package, and let delivery know, here is the package that you're using, basically. And we just pick up that package and see it safely through to its destination.
I guess delivery is a fitting name, if you think about it in that term. So
we do. We just deliver stuff. Exactly. Exactly. So what we try and do is say, like, in terms of like thinking about this and trying to move towards automations, we try not to worry too much about what is in the package. There have been times in the past where, say, for example, things like rollbacks, some of the nuance on sort of rollbacks sort of can fall to people being like, well, let me look inside the package and actually see if it's safe. And as much as we can move away from that, we set out for automation, right? Because it shouldn't be a delivery engineer analyzing package risk, right? That should be somehow automated or sit somewhere else, right? Like we try to keep the flow of packages delivering smoothly.
Yes. Okay. Cool. I think I get that. So I'd say like sort of my assumptions right now is that, picking a commit from the default branch, right? That's, an understood thing. There's not very much you have to worry about from that end. As in that's, you pick something at a specific moment in time, right? And that's okay, right? The challenge comes in assessing the stability of that change set, right? That's probably a little bit trickier but you have systems set up for that as well, especially on GitLab.com.
Yes. Yes, that's largely true. Yes. Now,
Okay.
the challenge, I guess, from a product point of view, comes from the what we're creating as a single package, or what we're delivering as a single package. And the way the GitLab is set up in terms of sort of the GitLab repos and the GitLab product is we have our projects in multiple repos. So we are pulling changes from multiple projects into a single package. From a product perspective, we are sort of expecting that you're just working with a single repo. And that's always been our kind of major difference between what we end up trying to do, or what we end up needing to do, and how the product fits with that.
So in the simplest process is you have a single repo, you package that up into something and you deploy it.
Exactly.
And we don't we don't have a mono repo, but we ship a monolith, like the big 900. I don't know if it crossed the gigabyte mark by now, the package.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, but we package everything in there, right? Everything that you need to run, or like many things, which means you have to pull from 15 different repositories.
That's it. Yeah. So that's the kind of challenge on our sort of practical day-to-day stuff.
Is that more a challenge for you or for the distribution folks?
I think that's for us, because what that makes it difficult for us to have is a sort of dropping in points into the product. So if I want to see this, where would I drop in? So that's where we end up building a lot of our custom tooling to actually bring all of that information together, so that from a delivery perspective, we can look at things from a package view, which is what we care about. Like, this one package is going to .com, and ignore the kind of the fact that actually inside this package, we are pulling changes from like 8 projects or something like that.
I see. Okay. So for example, for your package on GitLab.com, you don't need Postgres included, because GitLab.com has its own way of like managing Postgres via Patroni. So the Postgres part of the package that would be built for self-managed is useless for GitLab.com. You don't really need that.
We don't use that. Yeah. And I was thinking more like the, for example, release managers want to know this package is on this environment. They don't necessarily care that package doesn't have Gitly changes, or it does have pages changes. That doesn't really matter from a release manager perspective. They care about this unit of a package, but I don't think we really have a way of representing that at the moment in the product.
I see. Okay.
But I'll show you more on that. That might make more sense. So this is the super high level. So release processes are reasonably straightforward. We use issues that we go through. Let's see if I have one available. So we are doing the prep at the moment for 15.7. And it is basically each month we just have a generated template of all the things that need to happen in the month for us to end up with a release. And the release managers just basically work through this so that they can like get through. So we can see 19th, we will announce the candidate commit. On the 20th, we're going to create the test release candidate and see how that works. So basically, this just walks us through. So relatively straightforward to organize those things. This is where I'm never going to ever find that thing, that tab again. Here we go. Too many tabs. So that's the release process. Pretty straightforward, just a load of steps that we go through. Now on deployments, we have a lot of interesting pieces that sit around deployments. So if I dig onto the deployments page where we get the more involved, so those three sort of steps of a new package is created, we check if we can deploy it, and then we deploy it, is even this isn't like the super detailed view, but it is the next level down. So we have a layer that sits above this is the decision of, can we deploy? So what we're checking for then is, do we have a production changelog in place? Is the weekend changelog on place? Like, do we have an S1 incident running? There are certain sort of overarching things like that that would just automatically block the entire deployment process.
I see.
But assuming things are healthy enough for us to deploy, we would then kick off this process.
Yeah, and I imagine this is custom defined, right? This is not in the product anywhere, sort of conditional deployments.
Yes, correct. So we are reasonably close. So the blocking on incidents or high sort of change requests, we are using labels to do that, to drive that functionality. For the weekend changelog, that's custom tooling that actually release stage group do have the deploy freeze feature, which we could switch over to. That actually does, that is comparable. We just haven't prioritized the work to do that switch, but we could do. The one we don't have is any way of handling something like a production changelog. And that is a slightly different type of changelog to the weekend changelog. The weekend changelog is like always between these dates. It's always between like a certain time on Friday and a certain time on Monday, and it can be overridden with certain criteria. The production changelog is different because they're sort of scheduled in advance, and they are random dates because they depend on need. We don't have anything yet that matches the use case we use for those.
Okay, but the problem you're trying to solve, or you have solved, right? It's in existence, is you need to be able to conditionally schedule, or you need to check if deployments can run.
Correct.
So
yeah,
in an ideal world, you know, if you have a deployment system on GitLab, you would be able to say, okay, you know, here are the conditions under which deployments can happen, right? And then you can define rules, right, that say, well, if there is an active incident of this severity, don't do it, right? If it's a weekend, don't do it. If a custom condition is met and it is between these dates, don't do it. So you need kind of a rule, sort of rules-based deployments that already allow you to say, like, okay, you know, like if any of these things is true, we're not doing it.
That's it, right, exactly, yeah. And have ways for us to, for all of our sort of changelog type processes, they all have a way of overriding if needed. So having some way where we can also do that stuff as well.
Okay, so it's like conditional deployments is the...
Yeah, exactly, that's it.
Is that a, like, as you know, I know nothing, is that a thing that we have on our roadmap for GitLab?
I believe we have elements going towards it, yeah. So there are things around kind of like, I don't know exactly what it's called, but there are ways of kind of authorizing deployments, either like maybe authorize in advance or authorize a particular one. So those things get quite close. Cool. So yeah, I believe that we are like, we have some issues that describe things. I think they're being considered, yeah.
Yeah, well, that sounds good. Cool, thanks. Sorry, you can tell I asked a lot of questions.
No, that's great. Please do. Cool. So once we have basically determined, like, we have a package and we are able to go ahead and do a deployment, we then attempt to start deploying. Now, at each of these stages, we also, as I talked through the environments, each environment also has the ability to be locked as a sort of isolated thing. So the pipeline can also be paused at stages by locking certain environments. And what that means is it allows us to be running multiple deployment pipelines in parallel, but not overlapping on the same environment. But what it means is if deployment A is in progress and it's currently deploying to the production canary environment, pipeline B, which started up, won't also be deploying to the same place. It will get queued up behind it. So it's one of the ways we've got MTTP down, is to actually pretty much every deployment is near constantly deploying if we can achieve that. So it's like a constant conveyor belt.
Does this also mean that multiple versions, or I guess that you can say this, right? Different versions of GitLab are running in production at the same time because there's always ongoing deployments?
No, we're not quite there. So we have a couple of pieces where we make sure. The reason for that is all around the mixed version testing. So we have some extra controls to manage environments to allow specific testing of mixed versions. So because of that, we will always have we'll often have two versions running in production, because the way we deploy to our clusters is we do two and then the other two. So we have 4 of them. So it will be previous version and new version, and then everything is that. And then the next deployment will come through. We haven't got to a stage, I expect we will do in the future though, but it will make testing a bit more complicated, where theoretically you could have a different version on each of those 4 clusters. And it could be a more granular rollout that allows things to go through. We haven't got that right now. It is A and B.
Okay, thank you.
So I will not go into, I'll try not to go into too much detail, but shout if you do have more questions, just because some of this you really won't need to know. But basically we have a number of environments, right? So a package, we begin deploying. Now, staging canary is our key environment. That's where pretty much the bulk of our testing takes place. It's the first environment that we deploy to. And so that's the kind of essential one. Alongside that, we are also deployed to the staging ref environment, which is built from the reference architecture. That is not a blocking piece of the deployment pipeline, but it does the same package in parallel to staging canary. We also deploy to staging ref. So staging canary, we deploy the package. Assuming that all goes well, we run QA tests. These are testing the functionality of the package, but they also contain the mixed version testing. So this is where it starts to get a little bit complicated. So these tests also hit staging. And so this gives us a way of recreating the production rollout environment. So in production, we have a production canary and we have a production like main fleet. They share a database. And we've recreated the same setup on staging. And the idea of the mixed version testing is basically to be like, is staging canary working as expected when we have this new version on it? But also, is staging still working correctly when staging canary has this new version on it? And that allows us to check for mixed version problems, which we have seen in the past on production. So previously, we've had cases where we put the new version on on production canary, because it shares the database. Users of production were getting like unexpected behavior because of that canary. So it gives us a way to test for that stuff, basically.
Okay, cool.
So that adds some complexity. It means that we need to really carefully manage the version that's on the staging environment. Staging environment must match up with the production version so that we can recreate the same rollout pattern that we will see on the production canary and the production. So we want to, what will happen on this pipeline? I'll repeat that at the end. But basically what happens on the pipeline, we deploy to staging canary, we run tests. If those pass, we automatically deploy to production canary and we run tests. And if those pass, we also have additional like health metrics coming from production canary, because production environment has a small amount of real traffic. If those tests pass, it then sits. We have a bake-in period where we basically just leave it for 30 minutes and check nothing horrible happens. After those 30 minutes, if everything still looks fine, release managers get an alert that basically says, you can go ahead and promote this. They have a manual promote button, and that then triggers the deploy to staging. So we always begin staging runs ahead of production. We keep the 2 versions in parallel, but staging runs slightly ahead of production. And then some like 30 minutes later, the production deployment also triggers and that runs through.
Okay.
So what this means is we have the canaries get upgraded first, and then the main fleets. So staging canary, production canary, then staging and production. Staging and production will stay. We will keep those two versions the same. So if the deployment to production failed for whatever reason, we would roll staging back to match the versions up. If we deployed to staging and it succeeded, we didn't do a production, we would also roll back, but we carefully manage the versioning.
So, but that does mean that staging and production are only 30 minutes apart from each other, roughly.
Yes, they are almost in parallel, yes.
And what does that window allow you? Like, what's so I see the deployment to staging canary and then to production canary, but now you have staging and it is 30 minutes ahead.
Yeah.
What does that buy you?
So it does two things. So the main one it does is it gives us an hour's baking time between production canary and production. So that's a slightly longer window for our baking time. It also is, if anything really drastic happened on staging, we have a chance of stopping on production. In actual fact, they end up more staggered than they look, because production is so much bigger than staging. Staging actually takes only about 30 minutes to deploy. Production takes about 90 minutes. So actually, it gives us a window. I don't think we've ever actually needed it, though, interestingly, because the way staging canary and production canary works is, if it is a problem that is going to show up in the staging deployment, we've almost certainly caught it ahead of this time. But it is it's just another added safeguard, so that we do run the change through every test environment ahead of our production deploy. Yeah,
and I guess you can still conditionally run certain things in staging that are not quite ready for production, which I think that is probably one of the benefits that I've used in the past, that when you do certain things in staging that are not actually going to run in production for some time, but you still want to run it in staging.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. For the developers, for most things that the developers do, maybe probably not 100%, but pretty much everything should be visible on staging canary.
Yeah.
One thing that we do test quite uniquely on staging are infrastructure changes. So if, for example, the database has been upgraded, it will be different between staging and production. So that's kind of an additional test area.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So that is where the complexity comes in, right? So this is what the release managers spend most of their time coordinating and managing, because what will normally be happening is, you see above here, so these are the times we actually are creating new branches and new packages. So they come in every 3 hours or 3 to 4 hours based on release manager schedule. Now, what we have here is a pipeline that takes around 5 to 6 hours. So what would commonly be happening is the release managers would be deploying, let's have a deployment that's going on to staging canary. They may have the package ahead is currently like on production canary or baking. They may have another one that's currently rolling out to production. So they are coordinating all of those pieces. If any of them fail, or if we have any problems on production, they take action and basically decide, like, what do I need to do? Do I need to pause things earlier on, or is there a fix I'm expecting to come in? Or so that's basically their job, is to coordinate all of these different boxes and make sure everything is safely reaching production.
That sounds, just on the surface, it feels like a process that is complex enough and dangerous enough that I wonder if you would ever be able to sort of truly automate it.
That is the challenge, for sure. So at the moment, it is reasonably well automated. And I think we can see a decent path to automate further. So at the moment, the only manual step is box 6. And that's actually not a required manual step from the technical point of view. The challenge we actually have is, we don't want to deploy to production if we don't have a release manager online or available.
Yeah.
And what we haven't yet got to a sort of agreement across all of delivery group is what would be a good way to manage that. So everybody has quite different working patterns, everyone has different working hours. And what we haven't reached an agreement of is like, do people kind of like clock in and therefore deployments are running, or do you clock out and that pauses them, or do you have some other way of control? We haven't reached a great way of actually solving that. So right now, given this is literally just a button, it's a fairly low overhead, but all the rest of it is automated, and the environments all check for basically like availability. Like, am I already in use? Am I healthy? Can I allow this deployment to go through? And they pass through the gates. I think what we're going to have the really big challenges due to the complexity of this, and the fact it's really centralized. So like if, for example, the QA tests fail on production canary, it's not something that you could easily just say like something like dev escalation. Like, you don't think you could just page like a random developer and say, hey, get this unblocked. There's a certain level of complexity and sort of domain knowledge required. That's going to be the challenge, I think, is how to increase ownership and visibility of the process whilst it's so complicated, and it will be difficult to get people to be able to take a bigger part of.
I see. Cool. Thanks for that color. By the way, I realized my microphone was way away, so I hope I was actually audible.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's not good. It's not good.
Cool.
Cool. So one other thing I've mentioned, which we also have a great opportunity for, which we haven't yet, we have the pieces, quality are also thinking about, we haven't yet done. So at the moment we rely quite heavily on QA tests. So we do the deployment, we then run tests. If the tests pass, we do the next deployment, we run the next set of tests. So while the deployment can be relatively slow, like it's not exactly, but I always think of each environment as being an hour. So it's about an hour for staging canary, it's about an hour for production canary, and it's like actually a couple of hours probably for production. So we do quite a lot of deployment work. Then the tests can be about 20 minutes. They may fail, and basically what they could be telling us is, this thing didn't deploy correctly, or, there's something fundamentally wrong on the package. So what we've been sort of talking about for a while and thinking about, and also quality are thinking the same, is how to improve environment health checks so that as we do the rollout of the deployment, so we have better checks on production, but they are more telling us, is the production environment healthy? They're not re-evaluating the package. In order to do that, we would want something similar on our test environments. So how can, as we roll these out, we can actually be monitoring the health of the environment? Like, has it been affected by this new package? Is there possibly like a memory change or an increase in errors, or something that we could detect earlier than the testing?
Yeah, well, this is maybe timely because all of those things always happen at the same time, right? I have a meeting later on with Wai Meng, who there is some concern about mandatory upgrade paths. And there's another MR that I saw that would allow, which is not merged yet, which would allow product managers and engineering managers, or a combination of the two, to waive compatibility requirements for certain changes. So let's say that the front end on a minor subpage is going to be broken until this other thing is going to be shipped. But I don't fully understand that yet. And my worry would be that this would show up in deployment pipelines as increased errors, right? And as, something is wrong. So how do we know that that is intentional? Right? It's like, we're like, yep, that's fine. When somebody said this is going to be okay, whereas all of our systems are maybe testing this and so like something is up, right? And then so I'm a tad worried about it, and I need to understand it better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the really big one will be these QA tests, because they are the end-to-end like browser tests. For most changes, this box 2 is the first time they run on the change. So you can run them as part of the package and QA job. But for most code changes, that's like a manual trigger. So it's sort of like for if you do something, a real big front-endy change or something like that, you're definitely recommended to run them. I think people generally do run them. But for the majority of changes, they don't get run. So this is the first time that we actually run those. So there's a very, very good chance that, if we had like a page that was expectedly broken, it could easily fail those tests.
Yeah.
And we have a bit of an unfortunate delay there, because what sort of happens is it's a little bit of a round robin. So the release managers will see, or not always, but the worst case is release managers are the first to say, oh, these tests are failing. They would go to the quality on-call engineer. The quality on-call engineer would go, oh, okay, interesting. That looks like a real failure. Let me go and find someone. They either use dev escalation, I think more commonly, they know which stage group to go directly to. And you ask a developer basically, like, is this a real failure? And make a decision from there. So it's a little bit, it can be quite a long debug process.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. Thank you. Cool.
So that's the super high level theoretical version. And if it's helpful to dig into more of these things, then we can also certainly do the more practicalities of like what the release managers are seeing and doing in amongst either this process or the release process, if you want to know more of the kind of hands-on details.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'll review those pages. If you, I will probably be able to find them in the handbook, but if you could send them to me, that may save me like 5 seconds of work. I think there are a couple of things that I'd like to learn. And you touched on some of them. Is like, how time intensive are some of those boxes? Then who owns some of those boxes and who does what where? I think that is interesting to me. And I think then lastly, maybe we can try and figure out what parts here require custom tooling. And I think we talked about it yesterday, maybe, that getting sort of digging into that, I think may be quite useful, because it may surface opportunities for us and what to do and where we believe the value is. And I think given that you have a long sort of process, we may need to choose sort of a level of abstraction. But then I think we could sort of decompose this process and look at different parts through different lenses and say, the QA is actually owned by the quality engineering. This is how long it takes. And these are some of the problems that we're seeing here. And this is how this is being handled in GitLab. And this is the custom tooling. Then I think it may give us or you probably have all of that in your head, but it may help me and the new product manager when they're on board to actually look at this and say, like, okay, what can we do here? And I think that may be an interesting exercise to go through.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. Yeah. That sounds great. Yeah. I don't think there's anybody who has the whole thing in their head either, because we have a sort of a layer beneath this, which is like the release managers. And then we have the layer beneath that, which is how the tools actually work. So there's some good levels of complexity. I think certainly for you certainly don't need to go too many layers beneath. So, but yeah, I think that sounds like a great next step.
Excellent. Well, then thank you so much for your time. I learned a ton today. I think this is quite the accomplishment as well, to set all of that up. So I'm pretty impressed. And I know that there's a lot of thought that goes into all of those parts as well. And because there's risk involved, ultimately. And so this is interesting as well to learn a little bit more about.
Awesome.
So,
great.
Thank you, Amy.
No worries.
I'll digest it and I'll probably come back with more questions.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it.
Cool.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.